And you're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. My name is Dennis Bernstein. In one moment, we'll be joined by Harvey Wasserman to get an update on the situation with those sailors. But first, we go to Japan, where Steve Zeltzer, reporter here for KPFA, is on his way to Fukushima.
This is Steve Zeltzer. I'm a reporter for KPFA Pacifica. I do a show called Work Week Radio. And I'm coming back to Japan on the third anniversary of the Fukushima disaster to look at what's really going on in Japan and to find out the real story about the continuing leakage of radiation from the Fukushima plant. And we visited Sendai and Osaka and Kyoto, and now we're heading off to Fukushima, where there'll be a commemoration rally.
And what are some of the things that you've already heard along the way as you prepare to be at the rally?
Well, we went to Kyoto and also Osaka on the 9th, and we talked to activists, teachers. There was a demonstration in Osaka yesterday of 7,000 people, anti-war activists, teachers, public workers who are fighting a right-wing governor, Hashimoto, and the government, the Abe administration, which wants to restart the nuclear plants. And we were told that there's continuing repression. Activists here are being threatened, including Professor Shimoji, who was arrested for handing out leaflets. The government is trying to suppress opposition to nuclear power by passing a secrecy law, which just passed the parliament, and also by intimidating anti-nuclear activists and saying that they have to keep quiet. And despite that, people are concerned about the danger of the Fukushima plant, which continues to leak radiation.
What exactly is supposed to take place later today in terms of Fukushima? What kind of activities are planned?
Well, there's going to be a commemoration rally to commemorate the people who died in Fukushima, also to demand that there be protection for the contract workers. One of the things that I learned in Osaka from the president of the day laborers is that many day laborers are being brought into the plant. They're not being registered, and they're disappearing. There are 800 day laborers, apparently, who have disappeared from contact by the union, which means they may have been killed or died during the work of renovation of the plant. Also, the government is trying to change the textbooks and trying to educate the children that nuclear power is safe. So we learned from a teacher, Osaka Teachers Union, that they're being ordered to give basically propaganda telling these students that nuclear power is safe and that you can overcome radiation.
You mean the teachers are being presented with the materials that they are being ordered to?
That's correct. That's correct. The government, KEPCO, which is Kansai Electric Power Company, are in the schools, and they're basically propagandizing the children that nuclear power is safe and they can overcome Fukushima. In fact, they're telling people that they're going to make a business of decontaminating plants, not just in Japan but around the world, because of what they've learned in Fukushima.
You're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. We're speaking with Steve Zeltzer, who is a reporter here at KPFA, does his own show, and he is in Japan. He's on his way to Fukushima. There will be commemorations there and all kinds of activities, and we're going to follow this. We began last week. We're going to follow it today and tomorrow. Well, you know, Steve, and I guess you alluded to this, but the new government is pro-nuclear on steroids. They actually want to be on the cutting edge, or on the cutting edge, they consider themselves, of the new peaceful nuclear atom, and that means distributing it. So it's a tough road there for people who are still thinking about Fukushima, which is itself cleared out and will be for, I don't know, tens, hundreds of years.
Well, there is no reprocessing of nuclear radioactive water. Tritium continues to be in the water, and there's no place to put the contaminated water. They have leaking tanks surrounding the Fukushima plant that are leaking water into the ocean. The core, which melted down at two of the plants, is continuing to deteriorate. So there's a potential of explosions at these plants. They're still trying to remove the rods, the nuclear waste rods. We also learned that from Dr. Helen Caldicott that she was threatened. She spoke at a meeting in Kyoto on the 8th, and it was reported at the meeting that she has been threatened by right-wingers with death, actually. for speaking out against nuclear power and the dangers of nuclear power.
She is still in Japan now, I understand. We're going to be...
She is still in Japan doing her tour in Japan, yes. And Kaedo, a professor here, assistant professor, also spoke out about the dangers of nuclear power. And the government does not want people to know about it. In fact, there was no coverage in the mainstream media of her presentations and what she's trying to say.
And we're planning, we're doing our best to have her on the show tomorrow to talk about this stuff. Incredibly important. We're speaking with Steve Zeltzer. He's in Japan on his way to... Well, are you actually going? Can you go to Fukushima? Where will this protest be? Will you be contaminated? Will you be in jeopardy? Explain that.
Well, the protest is on the outskirts of Fukushima. Fukushima is on the outskirts of the Fukushima plant. But when it rains here, water comes down. The government says that they cleaned it up, but of course, this is an agricultural area, it's a forest area, so there's cesium in the air, when it rains, you get contaminated. So people are getting contaminated, and they've raised the limits of contamination, but actually it's illegal. Some people are calling for the jailing of government officials who are lying to people and telling people that they can overcome radiation. They're just basically raising the limits. And the other thing the audience at KPFA should understand is that the U.S. government, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Obama, are encouraging the Japanese government to restart the nuclear plants, and that they're encouraging them and saying they can overcome radiation. Of course, the U.S. government itself is spending $8 billion on building small, safe nuclear plants in the United States, and this is a serious concern that we have. Considering in the West Coast, which would be affected by another nuclear meltdown, and it is being affected by Fukushima, there's been no congressperson on the West Coast who's called for, in opposition to restarting the nuclear plants in Japan.
All right, we've been speaking with Steve Zeltzer. He's a reporter for KPFA Zone show here on the station. He's in Japan on his way to Fukushima. Steve, we're hoping we can touch base with you tomorrow to get an update, and we're hoping again to touch base with Helen Caldicott and find out more about that threat against her life. Anyway, we're going to follow it all very closely. We thank you for being with us. I urge you to be careful, and we'll talk to you soon, Steve.
Thank you guys for having me on.
And you're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. We continue with our Fukushima coverage 3 years after. And joining us now from, Southern California is Harvey Wasserman, Solutopia author and battler against all things nuclear. Harvey, welcome back to Flashpoints.
Great to be with you, Dave. Thank you so much.
All right, your initial response 3 years after. We just had a short report from Japan. Your thoughts on Fukushima?
Well, I wouldn't be in Japan myself. I mean, it's a horrible nightmare. It's 3 years since this disaster started, and things are worse than they ever were. We're about to get the first measurable radiation in the oceans off the coast of California. I went swimming in the ocean yesterday. I mean, I don't know how much longer it's going to be safe to do that. But this is a terrible disaster, and as Steve pointed out, the Obama administration continues to support nuclear power. It supported the Japanese government in passing this terrible State Secrets Act, and it's supporting the restart of the other reactors in Japan. It's just a terrible situation. Of course, they've also just approved $8 billion in loans for 2 reactors in Georgia, along with the 2 being built in South Carolina. I mean, we do have news that Exelon, one of the major nuclear utilities, may shut 5 reactors. You have this complete disconnect between the total economic failure of atomic energy and the push by these corporations to continue with this failed experiment, and I was going to say the Bush administration, the Obama administration's continued push for nuclear. It's all really, really wacky, Dennis, and we just have to keep our focus and work to shut the Able Canyon and the other reactors that are continuing to operate.
All right, so let's talk, Harvey Wasserman, about the sailors who were on the USS Reagan and who were exposed and who are suffering now. Could you please remind people, set the scene, what happened? Because it's not a case that's making many headlines.
No, the government has done a very good job of keeping this quiet. The USS Ronald Reagan, a $4.5 billion nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, found itself very, very close to Fukushima. In the day after the accident began, they were there on a humanitarian mission. Sailors on board reported a warm cloud of air that had a radioactive taste to it, a metallic taste, which we've identified at 3 Mile Island and at Hiroshima. And in the 3 years since, the USS Reagan steamed away from the area as fast as it could. It got 100 miles away, but still high radiation readings. We have had documents, transcripts of conversations through the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, that indicate that the people in charge, high up in the Navy and in the diplomatic service of the U.S., knew that there was radiation coming down on this ship. And now, 3 years later, we have almost 100 plaintiffs complaining of
100 plaintiffs.
Yes, serious radiation-related disease. I think the official number is 71, but the lawyers tell us that they're getting phone calls every day.
And that would be 100 mostly young, formerly very healthy plaintiffs.
Yes, these are all 20-somethings, basically, young people who are in the Navy. I mean, you couldn't find a healthier cross-section of the human race than people in the U.S. Navy. And mostly deckhands, people working on outside. They were servicing helicopters that were going back and forth. The helicopters were coming back very, very radioactive. And these reports, there were radiation measurement devices on the ship. It's a nuclear ship. There were other ships in the area as well that were doused with radiation. Some of the plaintiffs actually were on other ships in the area in addition to the Reagan. The Reagan was turned away from Guam, from Japan, ironically enough, and the Philippines as being too radioactive. And now it's docked in the San Diego harbor. We have many photographs of people washing down the decks, and it's a horrible tragedy. There was one woman who was pregnant while on board, a sailor, and her child was born 7 or 8 months later with major genetic defects. This we've seen before. We saw it with the Lucky Dragon, a Japanese tuna trawler that was doused with radiation in 1954, in March of 1954, actually. The Castle Bravo test on Bikini was twice as big as expected, and threw huge quantities of radiation into clouds that went in an unexpected direction. The radio operator on the Lucky Dragon died 6 months later. He's 40 years old. And 6 of the 23 crew members died of liver cancer. But, of course, the government denied any health impacts, although they did wind up paying some compensation. We had a guy, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission at the time, Louis Strauss, essentially accused the Lucky Dragon crew of being communists and wanting to make America look bad. And this is the same guy who said nuclear power would be too cheap to meter. So this stuff goes on. The radiation continues to come out of Fukushima. Still 300 tons of water a day that we know about. And as we heard from Steve, the Japanese government is now cracking down with American support on people in Japan who question atomic energy. We've always argued that democracy and nuclear power cannot coexist, and I think we're seeing it in Japan now very tragically clear.
How would you describe the role of the United States government, U.S. officials, in their sort of part of the cover-up? What role did the NRC play in the United States in terms of Japan, in terms of suppressing the story as it is being suppressed?
Well, actually, the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who's been forced out, and partly because of this, Gregory Jaczko, warned that there should be a 50-mile zone around Fukushima and told Americans to leave within a 50-mile zone. And he was vehemently attacked for this by the nuclear industry and by the Japanese, actually. I've just read a superb book by David Lochbaum, Susan Stranahan, and Ed Lyman from the Union of Concerned Scientists about Fukushima. I highly recommend it. It's called basically Fukushima, there's a subtitle that escapes me at the moment, but there was a tremendous argument going on, and Chairman Jasko said, look, this is way more dangerous than people think, and people should leave 50 miles out. Of course, in the United States, the evacuation zone is only 10 miles. And so, there's been a huge kerfuffle about this. The nuclear industry does everything in its power to, make it appear as if there are no health damages from any of these nuclear power plants, including Fukushima. We're hearing from the apologists for the industry that no one will be harmed by Fukushima. It's really insane. One of the most irresponsible things I've ever heard anyone say. You have children over there who are severely traumatized. They can't play outside. There is a heightened rate of thyroid abnormalities among children born near Fukushima. I mean, even PBS has called this a post-apocalyptic situation. There are a couple of very good reports, by the way, Dennis, PBS put out by a guy named Miles O'Brien, and there will be a third one tomorrow. I can't speak for the one tomorrow, but the two he did already are pretty good, pointing out the dangers with the fish and the problems at the plant itself. I mean, this is a catastrophe. This is 3 meltdowns, 4 explosions, spent fuel rods all over the place, water pouring into the ocean, and these guys are out there pushing more nukes. It's completely psychotic.
All right, let me jump in here, and I want to ask you this. I don't typically play devil's advocate, but there are many people in the so-called left, in the intellectual left, I've heard it on these airwaves at KPFA, that say that you, Harvey, others like Helen Caldicott are exaggerating, in fact, jeopardizing the real story by being alarmist and even sort of calling into question the real respectable left. Your response to that?
Nobody on the left has any business advocating nuclear power. If you're not,
they're not advocating nuclear, but they're just saying you
no,
are.
I'm not talking about you. Okay. There's nothing to do. The left has to do with nuclear power. Nuclear power is the enemy of democracy. You cannot have nuclear power and a democracy simultaneously. It is a totally corporate-controlled source of energy that will always be in the hands of the rich and powerful. And one of the reasons that these people have been fighting renewables so hard is because renewables actually allow a community and even an individual homeowner to control their own energy supply. Nuclear power can never be community-owned, and it's always in the service of those with big money who have no liability for what the damage that they do to the public. And what we're seeing is in Japan is the complete manifestation of the dictatorial nature of atomic reactors. Because here we have a terrible, terrible disaster, and the government has a huge interest in preventing the public from knowing what's going on, to the extent that they're crushing whatever democracy Japan had with the State Secrets Act. And when you play devil's advocate, Dennis, you are taking the side of the devil.
All right. Okay. So you're not. So you guys, you're not overstating the case. You don't.
No, absolutely not.
You don't think that there's any exaggeration going on here?
Look at the history of atomic energy. If you start with the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the government of the United States initially denied that there was any radiation involved at all. Then they said the radiation couldn't harm anybody, and they said the same thing about the tests in the South Pacific, which killed many, many people and have rendered parts of the Marshall Islands still uninhabitable. They denied, the medical industry denied that medical x-rays were harming pregnant women, and that was proven most clearly to be false. And we've had denials at Carlsbad now, where the nuclear waste dump is out of control, or had a major accident, let's put it that way. At 3 Mile Island, I interviewed people at 3 Mile Island. The people who were harmed at 3 Mile Island were never allowed to get into court with a class action. At Chernobyl, we have clear evidence that upwards of 1 million people are dying as a result of Chernobyl. And now Fukushima, the worst of them all. The Reagan itself, the irony, one of the ironies is that except for the people on site and a couple of villages very close to Fukushima, United States sailors wound up getting some of the very worst dose from Fukushima. And I guarantee you, in the history of Agent Orange and thalidomide and DES and all the other travesties wrought on the public for private profit, that the sailors on the Fukushima on the USS Reagan will get shafted. The Navy will deny any problem. TEPCO won't pay them. It's a horrible situation. But we have a long history with this, Dennis, and, there's just no denying that atomic energy is the enemy of democracy, and there's no place on the left for advocacy of atomic power.
All right, you're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. My name is Dennis Bernstein. We're speaking with Harvey Wasserman. You went swimming yesterday or today. What will determine whether you go swimming tomorrow?
I don't know.
If it's warm enough? No. I'm serious. I mean, like when do you tell pregnant women to stay out of the water? At what point do people not have water sports as a part of their life, even though they live in a place where the water defines everything? Well, at what point?
It's a horrible dilemma, and there's no easy answer. Really, we know that a minuscule dose of radiation is capable of harming an embryo or a fetus in utero. That's the fallacy of all these guys saying, well, there's not enough radiation to do any harm. Everybody who has been close to the nuclear health field, to health physics is what it's sometimes called, knows that there is no safe dose of radiation. There can never be a safe dose of radiation for an embryo or a fetus in utero. And so where do you draw the line? Well, you don't X-ray pregnant women. And if you're not X-raying pregnant women, then what are you doing exposing the public to this kind of radiation? In the wake of 3 Mile Island, the owners of 3 Mile Island proudly put out advertising saying, look, the exposure from TMI is only the equivalent of a chest X-ray. Now, they had no scientific basis for saying this, but it sounded good, and they said it. But the fact is that all the pregnant women in the area got an involuntary chest X-ray, and which included X-raying their embryos and the fetuses in utero, which were shown to suffer a double childhood leukemia rate as a result of a single X-ray to a pregnant woman. So, this is not a fun situation. We should not be having a dialogue among ourselves in the year 2014 about whether or not we can allow pregnant women to go to the beach. This is not, especially since the perpetrators of this problem have no liability whatsoever. Nobody from TEPCO has been prosecuted. TEPCO has made a fortune on the cleanup. You heard Steve talking about, they're going into the industry now of cleaning up reactors. TEPCO had a hugely profitable year last year. They're still in control of the Fukushima site, although they have absolutely no capability of dealing with it. And they're continuing to make money on the catastrophe that they caused. And it will harm people forever. So, this is the nature of atomic reactors.
And we still know very little about this dangerous cleanup. It still is being kept very secret.
Yes.
And we don't know.
We have no access. We have no access to information. We don't know what's happening with this fuel and the spent fuel in the pools that are suspended 100 feet in the air. What we do know is we need to shut the Diablo Canyon. As Californians, we have these 2 reactors at San Luis Obispo. They need to shut. We have successfully closed the 2 at San Onofre. That's just a huge deal. But there's still 2 more in Central California. They are in earthquake zone. They are in the tsunami zone. They need to be closed as soon as possible, along with all the other reactors on this planet.
Well,
and we do have the technology to get to a green-powered Earth, so let's do that.
Well, I guess you can relax a little bit. There was, of course, we know, an earthquake offshore up north, 6.9 or more in the Richter scale, but we hear that there was no tsunami from that one.
Well, thankfully. But, Dennis, there are 36 reactors in the United States that are downriver from big dams. And there's discussion, the Oconee one in particular in South Carolina, there are 3 reactors there. If the dam upriver broke, it's been said that as much water would pour through the reactors there as poured through a tsunami in Japan. So, we're not out of the water here just because these reactors aren't in tsunami zones.
All right. We're going to leave it right there. But and so what happens with the sailors now?
Well,
they have filed suit. They're being represented. Are they being cared for? What do we know about any of that?
It's
got a minute, but I want to. Yeah.
There is a class action suit, but they're not able to sue the Navy, so they have to sue TEPCO in American courts, a Japanese corporation that's denying everything. It's very difficult. It's a tough situation for them, and their health is only going to get worse. And I've seen this before. We saw it at 3 Mile Island. We saw it at Chernobyl. We saw it in the bomb tests. And well, there were 250,000 American soldiers who were marched through ground zeros in Nevada in the 1950s. For the atomic test there, they did not do well. And I'm afraid that the people on the Reagan are looking at a very similar situation.
I know, and it's frightening. I did see some of them speaking at the conference that was held in New York by Helen Caldicott a year or two ago, which was, I guess, on the second anniversary, and their situation, their plight, and the way they're being treated, disrespected, intimidated. It's all of great interest to us. Harvey Wasson, we're going to have to leave it right there, but I do...
Tomorrow, Dennis, I will be fasting from dawn to dusk on March 11th, and if anyone wants to join me, please do.
All right.
And you can come to nukefree.org and see what's going on.
Okay, we'll check in with you, Harvey. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you so much, Dennis. You're great. I appreciate this. I appreciate the show.
All right. You're so welcome, and you're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. Well, coming up next, maybe there's an attorney in the house, on the phone, who might have some advice for these sailors who are now facing it. We're going to take a short musical break, and we're going to be back with Daniel Sheehan. He's the people's advocate. Oh, yeah. Stay with us.